You're watching East Asia Tonight, live here on CNA, and we've been discussing how a second Trump or Biden presidency could impact US-China ties. And we now turn our focus to other East Asian countries. In Japan, Mr. Trump's possible return to the White House has bred a sense of insecurity. Well, Tokyo is worried that the former president's anti-NATO rhetoric could spread to Asia, potentially affecting a 72-year-old bilateral security treaty. Well, that concern also reflected in the recent visit to New York by senior ruling party member Taro Aso, who is a longtime power broker in Japanese politics, to build ties with Mr. Trump. South Korea, meanwhile, is concerned about a possible withdrawal of U.S. troops stationed in the country should Trump be elected. The former U.S. president is known for his skepticism about American forces in South Korea, which has long been the foundation of the two countries' alliance. Well, Biden and Yoon has been attempting to negotiate a new cost-sharing deal before the 2024 election. Analysts say Trump is likely to challenge any such defense pact if elected. And for more, let's bring in CNA's Nick Harper once again, Lim Yoon-suk in Seoul, and Michio Ishida in Tokyo. So, Nick, what is the likelihood of a second U.S.-China trade war under Trump, and how would it impact the U.S. economy and global trade dynamics?
I think there is a real fear, Ateli, that there will be a second trade war. Donald Trump making noises that he will extend the type of tariffs that he had in place, suggestions that he may even increase it to 60%. And that could have a huge impact here in the US, but also around the world. It's considered that around 300,000 US jobs were lost as a result of the last round of tariffs. Of course, President Biden campaigning in 2020 said that that was hurting US consumers, manufacturers and farmers. But I think interesting to note, President Biden did not roll back any of those Trump-era tariffs. He's kept them in place, and he's even spoken recently about extending them, for example, on steel and aluminium coming from China, increasing that to 25%. So we could see a real ramp-up, whichever man comes to power in the next election.
So, Michio and Yoon-suk, next question to both of you, but Michio first. In a nutshell, who does Japan want as POTUS and why?
Well, for stability, and as Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has just visited Washington as a state guest invited by Mr. Biden, and he strengthened the alliance. It's quite obvious who. But over the weekend, Mr. Biden called Japan xenophobic, along with China and Russia, which disappointed Tokyo. And Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi called the comment disappointing. In any case, Japan is preparing for Moshi Tora, the trending phrase in short for what if Trump returns. Remember, Mr. Trump formed close ties with then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He listened to Mr. Abe to some extent, so he didn't push Japan so much to buy more, invest more. But Mr. Abe was assassinated in 2022. So his close friend Taro Aso met with Mr. Trump last month for an hour. Mr. Aso later told Japanese media they exchanged views on the Indo-Pacific, the role of the alliance, on China and North Korea, economic security. And Mr. Trump sent his regards to Mr. Kishida. So whoever wins, Japan wants to be ready.
That's right. And Yoon-suk, what about South Korea? Who do they want?
Well, you know, although the South Korean government officially hasn't said who it wants, the South Korean government has always said that it doesn't matter and it can work with whoever becomes the next president. There are many analysts who are saying that it is going to be much easier working with President Biden. And there are already concerns here in South Korea about Mr. Trump returning to the White House, and mainly for security reasons because of his earlier remarks about South Korea having to pay more for the U.S. troops based here. And also many believe that he could actually allow North Korea to have nuclear weapons. And that's why, you know, the rising calls here in South Korea now to also have his nuclear weapons, because South Koreans simply just don't believe that the United States, if Mr. Trump wins, will come to South Korea's aid, and that this ironclad, relations between Seoul and Washington, a term we've heard so many times during this Biden administration, will continue to exist under Mr. Trump.
Right. And Michio, I mean, Japan's got, grave concerns regarding China's militarization in the East China Sea as well as South China Sea. So which candidate do you think is going to be more likely to effectively address those concerns?
Well, if you recall, in Washington in April, Japan and the U.S. held for the first time a trilateral summit with the Philippines, and they share concerns of China's movement in the South China Sea. You know, it's been attacking Philippine vessels, and the three countries agreed to train, synchronize Coast Guards. But there is uncertainty how Mr. Trump will follow up on this trilateral agreement, if he will at all. In terms of the East China Sea dispute, Mr. Biden has expressed his unwavering commitment to Japan over the Senkaku, which China also claims and calls Diaoyu. Mr. Trump has given his support in the past, but will the U.S. come to its defense under Mr. Trump in the event of a contingency in the region? Well, Nick, Mr. Trump said in the past, security pact with Japan was unfair. It's because the U.S. has to come to Japan's defense, while there's a limit to what Japan can do due to its pacifist constitution. Do you think Mr. Trump will think like that again?
Well, Midge, it's unlikely that we'll see really any change of opinion from Donald Trump. That was the big thing that he said time and again about really any country in East Asia, but also around the world, that those alliances were unfairly weighted in the other country's favour, that often it was the US that was out of pocket or that was having to do too much as part of that bilateral relationship. We're likely to see that nationalistic bent once again from Donald Trump. President Biden, of course, has been trying to build that alliance with Japan. As you mentioned, we saw Fumio Kishida, the Prime Minister, here at the White House just last month. That relationship, I think, has really blossomed over the last few years. There has been a strengthening of US-Japan ties. Of course, if Donald Trump comes in, that could be undone very, very quickly.
Yoon Sok, so how might a Trump administration's approach to U.S. military spending and a presence in East Asia impact South Korea's, I guess, national security as well as defense strategy?
Well, you know, I think it would have a very big impact because South Korea relies on the United States for security, especially against North Korea. Now, if Mr. Trump is reelected, many here believe that it is definitely going to strain relations between the two traditional allies. Now, there are also rising concerns that he could also threaten again to pull out the 28,500 U.S. troops based here in South Korea. And now, because of these concerns, the two countries have already started negotiations on how South Korea needs to pay, although the bilateral agreement they have now ends in 2025. And the hope is that they can reach some kind of agreement before the November elections. But then again, you know, many experts saying that Mr. Trump could always want renegotiations too. And that's why many South Koreans here also want the country to have nuclear weapons. Now, say, for example, if North Korea uses its nuclear weapons against a U.S. city and South Korea, the question is, will Mr. Trump send aid to South Korea? Many South Koreans here don't think so, and that's why there were rising calls when Mr. Trump was in the White House for South Korea to arm itself with nuclear weapons, and those calls are very likely to come up again if he is reelected. Now, Mitchell, you know, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida has said that he was willing to meet with the North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. Do you think it's going to make it easier for him to hold talks with Kim Jong-un under the Trump administration or the Biden administration?
Well, Mr. Kishida has been repeating his desire to meet Mr. Kim Jong-un without setting any conditions. That's despite North Korea constantly testing its missiles. A North Korean leader seemed to have responded to Mr. Kishida's call. He actually sent a warm message of condolences for the New Year earthquake in Japan and called Mr. Kishida Your Excellency. And this raised hope in Japan. Maybe talks will happen, but it hasn't. And we know that Mr. Trump has had good relations with Mr. Kim, so there's a tinge of hope. Mr. Trump may be able to pave the way for dialogue between Mr. Kishida and Mr. Kim. And Japan's biggest wish is to bring home those abducted to North Korea during the 70s and 80s, and in return provide North Korea with economic aid.
Some great points there. Thanks so very much for your insights. Nick Harper in Washington, D.C., Lim Yoon Suk in Seoul, and Michio Ishida in Tokyo. Thank you for that discussion. And on that note, we wrap up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and CNA 938 Radio. And you can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and X. Thanks for watching.